I want to thank Rem Boston, the entire staff, any of the pulpit guests, the musicians, for having me to engage with you today. I've had some mighty good Unitarian friends since the time of the Vietnam War, and I've been trying to get a grip on Unitarians for, I guess, about the past 50 or 60 years. And I'm reminded of a story that I heard about various religious faiths. What would happen if the tabernacle, the church, was on fire? I'm told that Catholics would go in and they would get the Eucharist and the table and everything associated with communion to keep it from being damaged. And I've heard that Protestants would go in and they would get the Bible and consider it to be a success if the church was on fire. But I've heard that Unitarians, if a Unitarian would go in, they would get the coffee pot. And we talked about that, and I understand why they value the coffee pot. I'm one of these guys, if no coffee, no talkie. So when I get up in the morning, I can't communicate successfully if I don't have coffee. I'd like to say that we must work while it is day, for when night cometh, no man can work. We must work while it is day, for when night cometh, no man can work. I'm also reminded of what Howard Thurman said. Don't let this harvest pass and lose your soul at last. Don't let this harvest pass and lose your soul at last. Congregation, I'm going to talk about tolerance and radical hospitality. Howard Thurman was a mystic, and many of us are mystics, is that we try to discover the sacred in everyday life. We try to find meaning in everyday life because we know that the only way that we really can find meaning is that we have to find out what constitutes right and wrong. What constitutes right and wrong? So that's what the search for meaning is all about, is finding the dividing line between right and wrong. And some of us believe that the dividing line is built into the very fabric, the moral fabric of the universe. It's hard and fast. And you don't have to be a scientist to understand that. You don't have to be an anthropologist. It's like you don't have to be a mathematician to understand mathematics. So we are in a search for what makes our lives worthwhile, so we don't drift into nihilism. Well, we don't drift into that gray area where you can't make sense out of night and you can't make sense out of daytime. You know, whenever you come into the pulpit, anywhere, you're coming into a holy place. It's almost like you need to take off your shoes, but I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But I'm reminded of sometimes, you know, you think about the fact that you've been doing some studying, you've been to theology school. I'm always reminded of the levity that you need anytime that you talk to people about anything related to the divine, that you've got to have some authenticity, or you can miss the point, or even deceive yourself. I heard a story some years back where a young man who had been to school, he had been to school and he had absorbed, digested quite a bit. He had dealt with Tillich and Bart, Martin Luther, Rauschenberg, all of these so-called titans of theology. And he came back home and his local church was having a business meeting. And he was in between semesters and he sat down at the business meeting and they were having a discussion. And it was going back and forth. They couldn't come to a conclusion. They used Benjamin Franklin's method and pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages, but they were stuck. And finally, one of the sisters said, well, if Robert's here, he's back from school. He's on break. Let's bring him up and let him help us to get through this dilemma. Robert came up. He said, I want to thank you for the pennies, the coins, the dollars that you have been sending to me. And he said, I've listened to your discussion and I've come to a firm conclusion. Y'all shouldn't get the chandelier. Shouldn't buy the chandelier. And one of the sisters said, well, why? He said, because I know for a fact that can't nobody here play a chandelier. Yeah. I don't want to get, I thought about that because Brother Cassim was telling us about his authenticity, his effort to connect in an authentic way when he was doing some outreach work over at the Wallop School. Howard Thurman says, years ago I had made the tentative discovery when I preached for the first time in the Methodist church in my hometown, and in amazement discovered that the same type of religious experience there that I had in my own Baptist church. Now in India, there was a redefining of that experience, only in a much more complex and subtle way. I had to seek a means to get to the essence of religious experience of Hinduism as I sat, stood, or walked in a Hindu temple, which was foreign and new. The smells, the altars, the flowers, the chanting of all of it was completely outside my universe of discourse. I had to find my way to the place where I can stand side by side with a Buddhist, a Muslim, and know that the authenticity of his experience was identical with the essence and authenticity of my own. There began to emerge a growing concept in my mind that things that are true in any religious experience are to be found in that religious experience, precisely because they are true. They are not true simply because they are found in that religious experience. It is not the context that establishes validity. On any road, around any turning, a man may come onto the burning bush and hear a voice say, "Take your shoes off, because the place that you are standing is a holy place." Even though you did not know it before, I think that is the heartbeat of religious authority. Little did I dream that the discovery that I began to make in the Methodist Church in Dayton, Florida, as a young Baptist preacher would move in a straight line to the Temple of the Fish Eye in Madura, India. Howard Thurman made it to India because of a generous gift from the YMCA. And it's a different experience for him. When he laid down at night, they said, "You have to take this light and you got to get up at night and you got to look around where you're sleeping." He said, "I've never looked around where I was sleeping. Why would I do that?" They told him because of scorpions and cobras. You know, you want to find out then when the next train leaving, when the next boat leaving, so I can get back to America. But at any rate, Howard at the Temple of the Fish Eye, holiness rushed in on him. What is it? Mysterium tremendous. It rushed in on him and it flooded him. In India, the incense and everything, and he knew that he was dealing with the sacred. And that's what many of us do. We don't call ourselves mystics, but we find ourselves searching for the divine in ordinary life. George Washington Carver, whom many of us know as the peanut scientist, he said that if you love something enough, it will talk with you. It will commune with you. If you love it enough. If you get to be a real master of an instrument, it's almost like you fuse and become one with that instrument. I want to suggest to us this morning, and let me give you this indication through my youngest girl. Her name is Ahimsa. It means do not harm any living thing by word, thought, or deed. Boy, that sounds a lot like Matthew 25. That sounds a lot like the greatest commandment is to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and soul. And the second is like the first. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So what I am suggesting to you as a universalist, that these truths run through all cultures. And that's why we've got to get around to paying more attention to Joseph Campbell, who points out that the Hopi Indians, Dr. Scott was talking about, I'm making you a doctor. Okay, all right. Yeah, but anyway, he was talking about these different pagan traditions that had truth encast in their creation stories. So every culture has a creation story. Every culture has a death story. And I'll tell you this, I do believe that is right. If you show me a hero, I'll write you a tragedy. Tragedy goes with heroes. Every one of us have a burning bush story where we had a defining otherworldly experience where you can't really explain it. I'm thinking about Dr. Thurman in his book, The Luminous Darkness. I remember I was at the beach Memorial Day 1965. And my buddy and I were on some inner tubes, and there was some misguided, I almost want to say brothers, I'm trying to bring myself to that, but they were in a boat during the time of segregation. They kept pushing us further and further out, and then they tried to run over us with the boat, and I left my inner tube and tried to swim back, and I couldn't make it. I was drowning. And I remember going down so far and pushing off the bottom. I remember sea life hitting me as I was pushing off the bottom. And I remember when I came up on the beach, I came up like I finally made it, used every stroke known to man to get back to shore. But I remember when I was underwater and so deep, everything above me was bright as the noonday sun. And that's what Howard Thurman talks about, is that divers report when they get to a certain depth that everything above them is crystal clear, as bright as the noonday sun. And so look, yes, when it's darkest enough, that's when we see the stars. I saw sea life above me. Howard Thurman tells us that if you go deep enough, if your dive is deep enough, you in fact see the luminous darkness. His friend and mentor, Dr. Benjamin Mays, I think that Dr. Mays saw the luminous darkness. Dr. Mays wrote a sermon called Be Kind to Judas. And none of us would name a child Judas. Judas is the most despicable name as a betrayer on the planet. But I want to tell you something, and I'm hoping we can expand on that. Just as Jesus came in the world to fight a psychic force that was destroying mankind, Judas was trying to fight that same psychic force. I want you to think about it. He said, be kind to Judas, because whatever you indicate was the fatal flaw, the Achilles heel of Judas. I think Shakespeare could appreciate this. Whatever you think was the Achilles heel of Judas, whether it was envy, whether it was jealousy, whether it was lust, whether it was pride, whether it was anger. When I look at Lester Holt and NBC News, they have a show that comes on weekly where they explore the inside of homicides and violent crime. I'm trying to think of the name of that show. But at any rate, when they explore that show, we find out is that the same set of virtues and values, or the lack of values, they operate in all of us. So if we ask somebody, tell me that you hadn't been angry. and angry without cause. Tell me that you hadn't been motivated by envy. Tell me that you hadn't been motivated by jealousy, or tell me that you hadn't been motivated by greed, avarice, or covetousness, wanting something that really doesn't belong to you. Wanting a talent that didn't belong to you. I'm thinking about the fact that Gibran talked about cripples who hate dancers. Why should a cripple hate a dancer? There's an African proverb from somewhere that talks about the fact that the people who can't dance, they hate the drummer and they hate drummers. So people, what I'm trying to work on, certainly within me, I know sometime when I'm watching the January 6th hearings and a certain personality or personalities come up, I spring up like I'm on an elevator and I say, lock them up. Put them in jail. And I'm wondering, I'm checking out my heart. Howard Thurman talks about he was having a vision that he was on a bus. And the bus was going, I think, to hell. And said that he looked at all the people on the bus. Wretched, thieves, prostitutes, bandits, murderers. And he's looking around at the people on the bus, and you know what? He looked in the bus driver's mirror, and guess who he saw sitting on the bus? He saw himself in the mirror. So, folk, I'm suggesting to you and I, we have some real talents, we have some real skills, but I'm just saying that we fall short of the mark and that the devil can slip in our hearts. I was reading something about one fellow was saying that he wanted to be married and he got to be an old man. He had always been looking for the perfect woman. And then he finally found the perfect woman. Wanted to propose to her, but she told him she couldn't do it because she was looking for the perfect man. Hey, folks, we do some spectacular things, but we are flawed. But the perspective that I have been governed by is that we are infinitely perfectible and we are infinitely corruptible. I've been reading Moby Dick since I was in high school. Moby Dick and Captain Ahab and the white whale just absolutely fascinates me. But you know what? What jars me is when I find myself in the deplorable behavior of Captain Ahab. So, folks, what I am merely suggesting today, when I start talking about be kind to Judas, and I want to tell you something else. Everybody you see and everybody you know is carrying some kind of weight on them. It may not be an anvil, may not be a albatross around their neck, but everybody is dealing with something. And that's why we ought to be kind to everybody. You don't know if you're going to have lymphoma tomorrow. You don't know if you're going to have leukemia tomorrow. You don't know if some surgeon is going to be talking to you about the fact that the surgery for your brain tumor is not going to be effective, so he wants you to get in touch with somebody who can do immunotherapy. So, folks, I'm saying we ought to be kind to everybody, including Judas, because Judas is in our own families. You think you can have some opposition from the world? You wait till you get some opposition from a family member that is upset with you. Especially after somebody died and there's $2 in the inheritance. You have an implacable enemy at that particular point. Again, I want to talk, as I try to hurry, a little bit about Mr. Mandela. Mr. Mandela, whenever he traveled, in many cases, he would travel with his 3 jailers. He was in Robben Island for incarcerated for 27 years. But when he traveled with his 3 jailers, 3 white men, they became thicker than thieves because of the dignity and the integrity that had been developed through them. Nelson became like a father. If they had an issue, they would go talk to Nelson about it. And so they represented the new South Africa. See, South Africa was on the brink, people. South Africa was on the brink much worse than the Gaza Strip. Much worse than what's happening in the Middle East. Somebody from the United States went to South Africa and they told the black people of South Africa in a speech that you need to run all of the whites out of South Africa. And you know what? The fighting forces sent a delegation to him. And they said, we want you to leave South Africa immediately. Because we are building a non-racial democracy here. We don't want that here. So in other words, people, I mentioned that to say that we've got to, I'm going to give you an example, another example of radical hospitality. After I gave a little talk here, oral history, I had a conversation with Rem Basson's mother right there. And somebody asked me if Rem Basson in the break, if he gave me permission. And you know what? You know that old saying, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. But no, I did have a conversation with Rem Basson prior to. But here's what I wanted to say. His mother right there looked me in the face and somebody else, and she said that when she was teaching in Philly, that she had a glass of water that she was getting ready to drink, and a young man came and spit in it. And what she did is look that young man in the face, and she took that water and she drank the glass of water. Hey, folk, I'm asking. That's why Maya Angelou is right. Courage is the indispensable value, because without courage, you can't exercise any other values. She didn't care who was looking. Now, I'm saying that she had a transformative impact. People who do something extraordinary at the point of crisis, whether it's Rosa Parks. There were 4 other black women before Rosa Parks who had protested on the buses, but things came to a head with Rosa. In 1955, a woman stabbed Dr. Martin Luther King, put a dagger in him. It was a fraction from his heart. And they said if you had sneezed or coughed, you would have bled to death. Martin was asked, as he was recovering, say, that woman who stabbed you, what is, he said, tell her I love her. Tell her I love her and I want her to get some help. You see, this country, the United States, was changed because of radical hospitality. It was changed because some people understood redemption. They understood suffering that would bring about redemption. And so a dog biting you would not deter you. You can sing, before I be a slave, I'd rather be dead in my grave, while you were in jail, and you can decide if somebody spit on you, that you wasn't going to hit them back. That's how this country was changed. That's how the civil rights movement, the fight for democratic rights, changed this country. But once you go home and get your gun, it's like Coretta said when Martin came home and his house had been bombed. He went to the closet and he got a shotgun and he started loading shells in it. Coretta told him, said, Martin, if you go out on that porch with that shotgun, this movement is over. And she was absolutely right. I'm comparing the courageous act that Reverend Boston's mother took. That's what keeps us from going to barbarism. That's the difference, that the civilization is that somebody has to suck it up. And they have to make a stand. I want to close by reading something to you that I hope to elaborate on more on December the 2nd. An idea that can be represented mathematically is one that can be represented unambiguously, and anything that can be represented unambiguously without serious contradiction tends to be expressed in reality. And what I am telling you, the radical hospitality that we got from Colin Boston's mother, the radical hospitality that we got from Rosa Parks, and those who sit in 1960, guess what? They sit in 1960 one day in North Carolina, and the next day the news reported kids were sitting in all over the country because of radical hospitality. So now, through Rosa and all those people who went through that suffering, the civil rights, Viola Liuzzo, Sammy Young Jr., all of those people who lost their lives, we know what it takes to put clothes on justice, and we are grateful for them. Brothers and sisters, we're going to discover the sacred in everyday life. And we're going to be part of a small force of people right here at this Unitarian church, uniting with other people who in fact are going to change the world. God bless you and God keep you.